Welcome back. So Deputy Minister of Defence Bantu Holomisa says there are escalating domestic threats and has called for the country's internal security to be enhanced. He told members of parliament that the state of national security and porous borders required urgent attention. So let's talk about that. We are joined by defence analyst Ricardo Teixeira this evening. Ricardo, thank you so much for speaking to us, and we really do appreciate it. This is what I want to get into. Just your thoughts on what the Defence Minister, the Deputy Minister of Defence has had to say, Mr. Bantu Holomisa. He has talked about a concern about escalating domestic threats. Now, South Africa, when we look at, the war and tensions between Iran and Israel, for instance, South Africa thinking, oh, wait, are we safe, right? And we worry so much about external threats. But he said we need to be worried about internal as well. What do you make of that?
Thank you very much for having me. And we have to remember one crucial thing whenever we talk about SANDF and the use of SANDF domestically within the borders of South Africa. Now, there's a long history in South Africa where the military was used domestically in townships under the apartheid government. And we saw SANDF used again during the COVID-19 pandemic to enforce lockdown regulations. These are functions that fall outside of the mandate of the Defence Force and were specifically excluded from their mandate because of the historical role of the Defence Force in its local operations. Now, this is the purview traditionally of the police force, and SAPS is the institution with the 120 billion rand budget here. But every time SAPS is overwhelmed, SANDF gets called in. Now, that isn't to say SANDF should never be used domestically. Situations of national urgency, such as the July 21 riots or the recent KZN floods with humanitarian disasters, these are instances where SANDF can be called in. But SANDF needs to be able to deal with more asymmetric threats along the border and regionally. But when it comes to ultimately dealing with threats locally, the big problem that we're having and why SAPS is underwhelmed is that they're just simply not geared for the type of enforcement and the roles that are increasingly being required of them. And this requires a separate force. There was a theory in the 90s known as the third force, which never really got a lot of traction, but is seeing some renewed attention now, specifically in the Portfolio Committee of Police, where we are seeing Ian Cameron, the chairperson, call for a SAPS policing unit that is specific to urban environment, rural environment, sorry. And that type of force that we are talking about here, that the general is sort of implying is called a gendarme. It is a paramilitary type unit that is trained by the military, but has some policing roles and some policing powers. And with the increasing internal instability and the high crime rate, the Zama-Zamas, where we are seeing SANDF being used in subterranean environment to fight illegal mining, and along the border, these are typically roles that you see being used, typically roles that fall on the mandate of a gendarme, which is something that South Africa doesn't have, but is increasingly becoming evident that is something we need.
Yeah, this is what Holomisa is quoted as saying. Many have questioned why our soldiers are deployed on external missions while internal threats continue to escalate, and then going on to talk about how in this financial year we must, in partnership with Parliament, take a strategic decision on how our military can enhance internal security. But you mentioned instances where now, if we step outside of what happens at our borders, for instance, just what happens within the country, you mentioned in July 2021, the likelihood that we could find ourselves back at a July 2021 again. Do you see that?
Look, it's always going to be a possibility. If it happened once, it can happen again. The current likelihood, I don't see those same tensions playing, but that's the nature of threats, is that they materialize a lot faster than you can prepare for them. So I can't say it's not going to happen, but I don't see it happening in the near future. But again, that's not to say that it won't suddenly pop up. Another thing that we have to look at is the porous nature of the border. I mean, SANDF is deployed to the border, but they are not capacitated and able to patrol the border effectively. And even if they were, I don't think there is a military solution to the border problem. And until the problems in the home countries that people are crossing over from are solved, people are always going to have a reason to cross. And even if you had every soldier in SANDF strung along the border hand in hand, you will never be able to stop all the people coming over. And again, because of that nature, we have a lot of instability in the region through insurgencies and those threats could very easily come across the border and become a domestic threat here. And that is then something that SANDF and SAPS are going to have to work together to deal with.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at this. The conversation over the past 8 days in the country. Oh, we've heard the words, a threat to state security or national security over and over again over the past week, with the allegations made by the KZN Police Commissioner of, the police being so deeply infiltrated by syndicates, and he goes all the way up to the highest ranks, mentioning the Deputy Police Commissioner, mentioning the judiciary, mentioning members of parliament. Now, from a state security point of view, are we at a crisis mode? Because this is essentially what the president has said. When I come back from Brazil, we're going to address this because this is an issue of the security of the state. And he re-emphasizes that point over and over again.
I think we are in a crisis mode. This is a very, very serious threat and a very, very serious moment that we find ourselves in, and is emblematic of the larger problems in SAPS itself. There aren't many countries that have a Department of Police. Usually police falls under the Ministry of the Interior or an equivalent, what we would call Home Affairs. But what we are seeing is the result of SAPS having a lot of political power is that, there's been a lot of influence and a lot of control that has been at the hands of high-ranking police officers. And this is in my opinion, it's a political issue, but it's one that's going to have to be dealt with some serious urgency. And I fear that the Commission of Inquiry isn't going to act fast enough. But in this regard, something that is becoming increasingly crucial is the National Security Strategy and the National Intelligence Estimate. These are two documents that were finalized by the sixth administration under the previous parliament. And last year in her budget speech, Minister in the Presidency, Mbutso Ntshavheni, mentioned that she was going to be releasing these in August and September 2024. Now, the National Intelligence Estimate is something that is usually done on an annual basis and is updated, but it was never really released last year. It was not released at all. And the National Security Strategy is supposed to be the first one that was produced since 2012 that is supposed to outline our national security priorities and our foreign policy objectives within the region, and is going to be a foundational document in reforming both SAPS and SANDF. And again, she promised to release it in September 2024, and she hasn't done so. And tomorrow is the next budget speech for the State Security Agency. And again, this very crucial document that is crucial to our entire security cluster is nowhere to be seen.
Wait, I need you to backtrack and just give that to me again, because that's quite a thing that you've said. So let me understand this. You're saying that since 2012, we have not released a refreshed plan on our state security priorities since 2012.
Yes, I mean, I think I'll have to fact check on that one, but it's been quite a while. It's been a while since we've had a national security strategy. This was something that was in the works for quite a while. It's like the white paper on defense. We last wrote one in 1996. And there was a lot of white papers came out in the 90s, and then we had the 98 defense review, and then we went again 17 years before we had another defense review. These policy documents have a habit of taking quite some time to come around and to be refreshed. And again, when we talk about SANDF, we talk about the 2015 defense review. It is now 10 years old. The threat assessment that is within that document doesn't mention war in Ukraine. It doesn't mention the Arab Spring. It doesn't mention the proliferation of drones. And we still want to renew SANDF on that document. And again, the national security strategy, which is supposed to guide the entire security cluster, is nowhere to be seen.
Now, one of the things that we heard from the KZN Police Commissioner last week, Sunday, as part of the allegations that he put forward, was that there was an intentional blocking of posts being filled in intelligence structures in the country. I mean, do you concur with the assertions that Commissioner Mkhwanazi puts forward?
I mean, we'd have to see a lot of the evidence. I'm not privy to those conversations, but there has been a long-standing incapacitation of crime intelligence. And we've seen it now. We've got, I think it's 6 or 7 generals in crime intelligence are also sitting in the docket for a separate case. And it's not a good time for SAPS. We've got several high-ranking officers facing corruption allegations. Some are being charged. Several hundred. It came out in the police committee earlier this year. Well, a few weeks ago, from Ian Cameron, that several hundred police officers have been charged with corruption and are still on the job. SAPS is in my opinion, public trust in the institution is at an all-time low.
I'm going to just give you one last one, and then you can even give us, closing thoughts on what it is we need to prioritize at the moment with the issue that has been raised by the Deputy Minister of Defence, Bantu Holomisa, saying that we need more capacity for the military to deal with escalating domestic threats. So recommendations that you shared there, but also just last week we saw, of course, the tabling of the budget for the Ministry of Defence. Of course, this would be a talking point considering the sort of back and forth that's gone on with our deployment to the DRC, for instance, and the resources or lack thereof in the Eastern DRC. 57 billion rand budget for SA's armed forces. Is that enough?
No, it is far too little. In my opinion, it is a drop in the ocean for what they require under their mandate. If you look at South Africa's search and rescue responsibility area, it extends down from the Antarctic up through the Indian Ocean, and we meet the French halfway around Reunion Island. And on the west coast, it goes all the way up to the coast of Namibia, where we meet Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina halfway in the Atlantic. It is an immense, large area that requires a constant presence at sea and the ability to conduct aerial search and rescue over long distances. And SANDF and the South African Navy and South African Air Force don't have that capability, largely because of the constant underfunding of defence. The department requires, in my opinion, a budget. I mean, they've openly said in the defence committees that they're operating at a budgetary shortfall of 41 billion. We're talking about a budget that should be hovering between 95 and 100 billion rand. 57 billion is not enough. It is not going to be increased much, I think, in the next year, although I believe that if we look at the mandate of SAPS, of SANDF, and we look at the overlap with other departments such as SAPS, for example, when Border Patrol was taken away from SANDF as a responsibility, I think it was around 2008, and then it was given to the police, SANDF's budget was reduced and their personnel count was reduced because that was no longer in their mandate. But when it came back to SANDF in, I believe, 2014, it was, the budget didn't increase again and those personnel numbers weren't readjusted. And the same with when we look at public works taking over maintenance of public buildings. SANDF has over 34,000 buildings under their department. And to then have those buildings now brought back under their purview for maintenance, the budget hasn't been increased to reflect that.
Yeah.
And then we again look at search and rescue. That is a responsibility of the Department of Transport. I believe that the Department of Transport and the Minister of Defence aren't even talking to each other about that. But that is a function where the Department of Transport requires the Air Force and the Navy, and there's no budgetary provision for that.
Yeah.
Then we look at the humanitarian disasters, and that is a responsibility of COGTA, and again requires the Air Force and the Navy, and there's again no budgetary provision for that. So I think a lot of the other departments that are reliant on SANDF to fulfill certain functions need to come to the table, and everybody needs to sit down and say, look, SANDF needs every cent it can get.
Yeah.
Where can we get it from?
Yeah, and I'm just looking at that budget, and what I'm seeing here is about 64% of that 57 billion rand allocated to the Department of Defence.
It's for employees.
Yeah, 64% of it going to troops, to staff. Of the SANDF, a big number. But we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Ricardo Teixeira there, who is, of course, a defence analyst, speaking to us this evening. We continue with more news after this short break. Stay with us.